We're going to move into the slightly more technical part of the day and some presentations primarily from the guys in the plant, and I'll introduce John in a moment, around where we're going with the product, what 2018 looks like and so forth. So most of you will know John Richards, JADE Plant Manager. So John will be leading these sessions. We'll try to make them as interactive as possible, take questions, and of course I will be asking questions for prizes at appropriate points. Okay, John.
Okay, look, thank you very much. I can't help but say that that presentation from Greg was just amazing, wasn't it? I can't imagine that there's many of you in the room not thinking of a few applications to do with that. The one that springs to mind, of course, is the one that always happens with a junior developer, and they come up and ask you why they're having a problem, and then they just talk the way through the problem, and without you saying anything, they eventually go, oh yeah, and they run off. And you don't really need to be there. So now you can have this sort of person being there and actually having that conversation with you. You can just carry on doing your work. It's a bit of a shame, actually, because Henry's no longer with us, but I wanted to start by saying thank you to him and for coming here and doing the presentation he did, and for Skipton for giving us the support and commitment going forward. And part of that commitment gives us a great deal of confidence to think of the long term. And part of that long-term thinking, of course, is to recruit graduates. Because if you're only thinking short-term, then you recruit an experienced developer and you put them in and say, just do this and that. But if you decide that you're going to go with graduates, you're thinking 10 years out, you're thinking these guys will mature and give a lot of new ideas and emphasis and energy into the product. So what I'd like to do to start with is just introduce the three new guys that have joined the team. So down the back, I'll get you to stand up. Luke is Luke Derry at the end. I sort of can see what the problem is here. Those instructions weren't precise enough. Got it wrong, damn. So Luke Derry is the one on the right, and Luke joins us having done a computer science degree at Canterbury University. He went there as a mature student. Prior to that, he had a previous career which was largely in the arts. I mean, the actual arts like painting, sculpture, those sort of things. So he's bringing quite a different view into our plant. The artistic view has not been strongly emphasised in the past. We've generally recruited the nerdier type of people. So to have an artist in the group is fabulous, and I'm sure we're going to see some benefits to that in the user interface going forward. The gentleman in the middle is Matthew. I say Matthew because I can't pronounce his surname. Matthew also is a computer science graduate from Canterbury, and in addition to his studies, has worked as a web developer with a local company in Christchurch. And lastly on the end we have William. William has studied at the local CPIT and has spent a small career in the retail industry where he's built some apps to help his previous employers. And it's interesting now when you recruit graduates, you don't have to do a lot of thinking about whether they can build apps, because during the interview they just get their phone out and say, this is something I built earlier. And you know what they're capable of very quickly, just by that ability now they have to build new apps very quickly onto their phone. Now, one of the things that I've obviously been doing with these new guys is talking about the challenges that are ahead of them. It's quite unique for New Zealand. They're going to be working on things like databases and compilers and development environments. These are all things which are not usual, not a normal application. So there's some great challenges ahead of them. But one of the challenges that lies ahead of them is one that affects all of you when you start in the industry, and that is you're presented with an existing piece of software and a bug, and you've got to find out how that original piece of software works and the path through that software that this particular user took to get to that bug. And that's something we don't teach anywhere. Certainly they don't teach it at university, and we don't teach it on any courses. So if you go on a JADE course, we'll teach you how to build a new JADE application. We won't teach you how to investigate an old JADE application. In fact, our industry doesn't even have a term for it. It has some interesting terms, like it has software forensics and software archaeology, but they're quite specific. They're not this particular case. So forensics is generally around looking for IP violations in software, and archaeology tends to be for software that's no longer being developed. So a really old product, no documentation. I tend to think of that as archaeology. So in between there's this skill that we don't teach, you have to learn on the job, which is to look at a piece of software, work out how it works, and find out how the bug was manufactured. But I've got some bad news for them, because that's not the end of the problem. Because once you figure that out, the one piece of information that you don't have is intent. Why did the original developer code it that way? And that can be really annoying. I guarantee everybody in this room, at some stage when they've been doing this process and looking at code, they'll say something like, why the hell did he write it that way? It doesn't make any sense at all. I have to scrap it and start again. But in fact, if you knew the intent of the original developer, you would have a much better way of applying effects that is empathetic to what's already there. Now, we are reasonably good in our industry, certainly in the JADE software JADE plant, of keeping all our old design docs. We keep our design docs in the same way as we keep our source. We keep it in a repository that's versioned and so forth. And in, not all, but in some of those design docs, especially where there is multiple design decisions, we often record the design decisions that we didn't take and the reasons why we didn't take them, and that's really valuable to them. But one thing that I haven't said to these guys is the overall intent. Why did we start JADE in the first place? And as it happens, one of my colleagues sent me an email recently that was 16 years old. So it came went through the company in 2002, February 2002. And it was an email trying to finalise our message, what JADE was about, what our message was. And I thought that's how I'd start my presentation today. Do I have a clicker to click on? Oh, this thing. No? No, not that thing, not that thing. Oh, I'm over here. Let's give that a little look at this one. Is that it? Let's give it a go. We'll see, yes. Oh, it's starting to tick. Oh, is that a worry? Oh, that's the afternoon. Oh, here I am. Oh, here we go. There we go. This is the quote. Now, you'll be surprised to know that I had quite a few arguments with marketing about this this message at the time. I argued that the first sentence wasn't comprehensive enough, and so I came out with an alternative that was like about 3 pages. And so, quite rightly, marketing said, nah, we want to get a simple message out, and this is the message we came out with. And it was interesting. The last sentence is quite interesting too, because our users are so well informed now. They're using so many products out there on the internet. They have opinions about how their application should look and behave. So that's where we started. We were looking to simplify the way computers were programmed. Not just programmed, but they're the bits that we had to cut out. But that's how we started, and that's the message that I thought was worth starting the whole session to say, all right, these are the things that we're looking in the next release and the release after, but this is actually what we're trying to achieve. This is what the whole reason for the JADE product was. So that's how we're going to start. Okay. So what's the broad product directions that we now are facing? The first one, as we mentioned, we were trying to simplify it, but as a result of that, we made a product that was extremely productive. And in fact, we do have a number of sites around the world that have both a .NET plant and a JADE plant side by side doing similar applications, and we get anecdotal evidence of the productivity of JADE. And we don't want to rest our laurels. This is the area we want to look at. We want to continue to provide better productivity for developers. We had two fabulous presentations this morning around the use of skins and how the experience for their users would greatly improve. And thank you very much for those. They were great presentations. So we need to continually look at this, and in fact, the work that was done for both Able and Mind Your Own Business were instrumental in feature changes that will come through the product to make skins easier to use and more comprehensive. We want to make JADE easier to manage, not just to program. So programming is one thing, and making developers productive is one thing, but it's part of a whole thing. You've got your source control, your deployment, the operational management of JADE applications. So all of those things are areas that we intend to pursue. Now, in terms of productivity, we've got 4 areas we're going to look at. Obviously, we're going to look at the IDE. We'll have a little think back about 2016 and what we brought into 2016 first, and then we'll look at what's going to happen in 2018. And then interfacing. It's hard to get one word that encapsulates what I'm trying to achieve here, but we're looking at this is us playing well in the wider field. So we're looking at technologies that we can incorporate into JADE that actually give a lot of benefit to you in terms of what you can deliver to your customers. Also, in terms of building applications, we want to make that process easier to manage. So we're looking very much in the area of source control here. But also, in terms of building the application, there are language extensions which make that easier for you, and we'll continue down that direction as well. I'd have to say this is probably my favourite subject. We spend an awful lot of time diagnosing problems when we really want to be getting onto new work. It's extraordinarily frustrating as a manager when you go up to a developer who's working on your most important project and you say, "How are you getting on?" And you go, "I'm not even looking at that because I've got this priority A that came in yesterday and I'm trying to figure out what's going on." And if we can make the diagnosis of bugs that come through a system faster, then your developers will be back onto their new work quicker, and that's what we want to achieve. Okay, so in terms of the end user experience, one of the elements that we're looking at is performance. Now, we understand that there are 2 parts to the performance. There's obviously the performance that we can control, so we can do our bit faster, and there's the performance that's inherent in the application and the way you've written it. So we need to do 2 things here. We need to improve the underlying performance, and so we're looking at some of the key things that we do on your behalf and try and make them faster, but also we're trying to provide help for you to look at your application and say, how can I improve the performance? What clues are there that there might be bottlenecks in my system? This is another interesting one that we'll talk about a bit more length later on, but we want to give more options in terms of how you might interact with web applications, and at the same time of interacting with them, how you can make use of the code that you've written in your JADE application with your business rules. Okay, and as I was saying, the number of people that are looking at the use of skins has driven us to do more with the GUI to make these skins easier to fit, and also more options so that there are more elements of your visuals that you can use skins for. Skins, by the way, have been around quite a while for JADE, and so with 2016 we thought that we should invigorate, get some more emphasis back into skins, and delightful to see the results today. Okay, in terms of managing JADE system, Ty will talk a little bit later on about the integration of source control and third-party tools. We are looking at our utilities, obviously to make them faster, but also to make them easier to use. So, just a wee recap on 2016. I know not all of you are up to 2016. I'd encourage you to do that as soon as possible to get the benefits. In terms of appearance, our whole look and feel was completely redone. That was our experiment with skins to try and demonstrate that they were worth pursuing. And of course, as soon as we did the TOI and showed the JADE development environment with new skins, we got a number of requests saying, how could we do this for our application? We then put out some example skins, and then we started the process of Grey Rathian's group providing a service to help in that area. In terms of the user experience, we've mentioned skins, but also there were a number of extensions to controls, including animation that was introduced in 2016. The other areas that we looked at very much were productivity. We looked at the IDE. We gave a number of improvements to the user experience of using our IDE. We extended the language in terms of type methods, and we provided some new facilities such as the JSON parser. One of the things that I think we're probably most proud of with 2016 is the upgrade process. It is simple, it is easy, and we have had very little support workload as a result of people going up to 2016. It has been extremely good release. It is remarkably easy to go to compared to some of the experiences you may have had with 7.1. And I encourage you to get there as quickly as possible. Okay, now, whoa, that wasn't the slide I was expecting. No. Someone, right, okay, that's completely thrown me. Right, we'll have to ad-lib this bit. One of the things that we've done in 2017 was introduce JADE. And for some obscure reason, my JADE screen seemed to have disappeared on me. So I've talked to you about it. Right, so... Oh, have you? Oh, that's okay, not a problem, not a problem. Oh, okay, I'll just whiz through. We'll go... Oh, there's a bit about rockets. Oh, that looks good. This is a bit of a preview. Oh, afternoon tea. Did you enjoy it? We have cake. We have cake. No. Right, what are you up to? Oh, I haven't done that bit. Oh, you meant to see that bit. That's too exciting for you. JADE. Right. Now, JADE. Interesting subject. I'm glad I brought that up. Traditionally, we have accepted new feature suggestions via parsers. And yeah, that's worked okay. We've had lots of new feature suggestions through parsers, and we've implemented a heap of them, and that's all been good. But there are many drawbacks with it. One of which is that if you put an NFS in, he can't see it, and you can't see it, and you can't comment on it. I've got no way of knowing if it's just something that John wants and nobody else cares about. No way of knowing that. Now with JADE, you can comment on anything anybody puts in, and you can vote. And so we have an option of the way we look at them. So we can look at the ones that are the most popular, as well as some sort of chronological order as well. So JADE came along. We're obviously committed to reviewing them. We've introduced more stuff, which means for a lot of these we'll be able to do more of them. And we think with JADE we're getting more of a dialogue going. So even before we review them officially, developers putting in their own comments. I don't know restriction. If Ty wants to make a comment before we've reviewed it, off he goes, and that's what happens. So please join in and vote. Right, this is what it looks like. So let's come around this side. So there's 125 come in so far. This is quite a recent screen copy. Ready for evaluation basically means that we're still in dialogue with you. We haven't actually done a formal review. We haven't given you a formal reply. So this is an area where there's still just chat going on about the feature. That's it. If we've moved it down to pending, that means generally we're investigating. Like, we think it's a good idea, but we don't quite know how we're going to implement it, or how much of it we're going to implement. And so we're doing some work here, and also we may still be carrying on the dialogue. Once it's approved, then it's just available for a developer to pick up and complete. It actually says executing, but generally once we move it into this field, it's been coded, it's complete. It may not have been fully tested, but it's complete, and when it's gone live, then it's been fully tested and it's been released. Okay, and closed is the ones we've said no to. There are not many in there at the moment. There are one or two that we created ourselves on behalf of customers, which we got wrong, so we've stopped doing that. But I'll show you some numbers later on of how many in each. How long have we had JADE up live, John? Do you know? Does it ring any bell? Anybody know? 3 months, 4 months? Yeah, it's about 5 months. So 120 in 5 months is where we've got to. But the pleasing thing is here you can see, 8 people have voted for that, 2 people have commented that. We are actually, and it will take some time, obviously, building up a community feel about this product. Right. So, there's a review panel, as you'd imagine. It consists of the 2 Johns, me and John, and everybody in the plant. So all the developers turn up. We get, we don't say, oh, we're going to have a session on this particular part of the product. We bring all of the developers there, so the guy who is the database specialist may have a comment on the IDE and vice versa. So we get a nice forum going, and we normally invite a guest. Normally somebody from the support group, documentation, somebody else that's not directly a developer. Comes and gives us a different perspective. I say we review on average every 3 weeks, but obviously, periods like over Christmas we don't have any, and then sometimes during the year we'll have them every couple of weeks. So generally, the outcome of the review is that we change the status. Generally, it generally goes to approved or to pending. The order we review this, we haven't actually come to any conclusion about this. Almost every meeting we have a discussion about the order. Sometimes we look at it in the order of the most voted for, and sometimes we look at it in the oldest, and so forth. We haven't quite got to a definite theory about that yet, but certainly ones that get a lot of votes quickly, we review very quickly, and we try and get those to the top of the list. There's ongoing development with the actual product, JADE IDE. One of the, I'm going to show you some numbers here in a minute, and I know what you're going to do when you look at these numbers. You're going to add them up and say they don't balance. Now, that's what always happens when you do a presentation, you put numbers in it. The numbers don't balance because a few of the suggestions that have come in are about the JADE IDE tool, not about JADE. So people will say things like, well, can I have an automatic vote for the one that I put in? Those sorts of comments. So the numbers, my numbers here don't include those. So 125 in, we've still got 65 in that ready for evaluation. That doesn't necessarily mean we haven't reviewed it, because it means we may have reviewed it and we've started a dialogue. But we haven't actually made any sort of decision. If it's gone to pending, generally we've made a favourable decision, but we want to do some investigation, and there's like 27 of those in that area. We've approved 12, we've done 10. We haven't gone live with any yet because the next release hasn't gone out yet, and we've closed 6. Right. No, don't panic, Shane, you're not on yet. I've just got to go back. So, this is going to be fun. We're going to have afternoon tea again. I wanted afternoon tea. We didn't have. Well, we didn't really know, did we? This speed reading. Some nice diagrams there, haven't there? All right, where do we get to? NFSs. Now, I put this slide up to remind you that although we stopped the NFS process through passes, there's still a body of those going through. So, for example, in 2016, we put 131 of your new feature suggestions that came through passes. And for 2018, it's already 89, and there's quite a few more going through the mill. So we'd expect to see quite a few there. And we've even got a couple going into the service pack for 2016. So there's still quite a lot of NFSs going through the system, as well as the JADE. Eventually, of course, this will die down and it'll all be coming through JADE. Okay, just to remind you, our delivery process, talking about service packs, will continue to release on a year basis. So we'll do 2016, we'll do 2018 and so forth. And we're trying to get to a situation where we use a carrot rather than a stick, that you want to go to 2016, you'll want to go to 2018. We're trying hard to make that I don't want to use the word upgrade, that change from one release to another, from one release to the next, as easy as possible. So you want to do it. We're going to do service packs when they're required, and we're about to do a service pack for 2016. Talk about that, and I'll talk about why we think it's required at this stage. Okay, and the other stuff. You've actually seen this slide before. I just copied it. It saved me a bit of work. That was from the TOI. Right, so service pack for 2016. We're going to release that in the next couple of weeks. So the big question here is, why do we do a service pack for 2016 now? 2016's been going for over a year. It has had not a lot of problems. We have done a few hot fixes, obviously enough. But we come to a stage when we've got a body of fixes that we think form almost a coherent piece of work, and we'd like to get that out into the field. And the area here where we have had a bit of focus is on RPS. Now, there have an accumulation over the last few years of a number of quite esoteric bugs that have occurred once, and we've had difficulty reproducing them and so forth. And so we've really focused some development effort on trying to nail these last few. And the service pack for 2016 is the culmination of that. So there are a number of what we might call one-off bugs that were in RPS that we have fixed, and we're putting them all out there and shipping them in RPS, in the service pack for 2016. So 2016 is service pack is a very easy thing to apply. It's just like a giant hotfix. And if you're already on 2016, I'd encourage you to take the service pack when it becomes available. Okay, so that brings us to 2018 and what we're going to deliver in 2018. The broad directions we talked about in the product, you'll see flow through into 2018. You'll see similar headings. We're focusing on the similar things that we mentioned earlier. So in terms of the roadmap and better productivity we talked about, we're going to look at the whole software life cycle. So we're going to look at the IDE. There's going to be changes in the way, what you might call the the user experience of using the IDE, and there's going to be some new navigation facilities and just some different ways of you being able to use the product. In terms of language, we're going to do another language extension in 2018. This time we're going to look at parameterized constructors. In terms of testing, we are going to there's going to be some features, some extensions to the unit testing feature. But one of the key things here is we're going to make available a testing tool that we use internally. So we'll talk about that a bit later on. And source control, which Ty will talk about later. Right. So in terms of the better end user experience, interoperability, we're going to introduce the subject of WebSockets a little later on, and we'll talk about that, and hopefully that will give you a number of new options going forward. Well, I'll give you some user examples about that a bit later on. Performance, we've reworked some of the areas around collections, and depending on the profile of your application, you should all see performance improvements, but some applications you'll see market performance improvements where others maybe not as much. And of course, as we talked quite a bit about today, skins, there's some improvements coming in 2018, which means that you can be more flexible with your skins, and also they'll be easier to implement. Okay, and under the easier to manage area, we will talk about source control. Okay. So, in the IDE, we're going to provide a new navigation approach. So the normal, well, I'll do a demo of that new navigation approach a little bit later on, so you can see that. I won't need to talk too much about that. And one of the things that developers, almost all developers now seem to have, is multiple screens. 2, 3 is not unusual. And one of the things that you want to be able to do is to move things around. So we're making the whole of the browser floating. So we'll show you a little demo of that too. There's a raft of smaller things in there, mainly from NFSs and JADE IDEs that have come through. So there's improvement to the browsers, to the editor, and to search facilities in the IDE. Oh, and there's greater use of drag and drop in a number of areas in there as well. We're extending the, we talked earlier about diagnosis, and there's been quite a bit of work on the monitor to make improvements, and one of them is identifying transient leaks. Okay, right, so now I'm going to do a demo. I might sit down for this. Now, I'd just like to address the three newcomers in our team. Don't ever demonstrate to customers a piece of software that hasn't been released, like I'm going to do now. Just don't do it. You get in big trouble. Right. Oops, 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 oops. Right, so you can't see that. Why can't you see that? Have I still got that? Where's that one? No. Speak to me. How come my screen looks different to yours? Well, if I take that one, no. So, do I drag this across, do you think? Oh, no, I can. Yes, that's what I do. All right, here we go. All right, do you recognise that? That's standard JADE IDE. Interestingly enough, I've stopped broken the mic. Interestingly enough, Ty is going to talk a bit later on about our build process. And so we build JADE every night, and we then run it through a sequence of automatic tests, so that happens automatically every night. And so the output from that build is a mini release of JADE, and this is an overnight build that I took a few weeks ago. So the thing you have to do if it's non-release software is to touch nothing that you haven't demonstrated already to yourself. So careful. This is what it looks like at the moment. This is a standard JADE development environment, and if we go into options up here, you'll see a couple of things in here. If we go to browser, you see here, this has been around for a while, but we're going to use tabs only, and this was introduced in. Was it really? Was it introduced? Oh, good grief! And this is the new one here. Show navigation bar. So we're just going to click on that and have a look, see what that does for us. And as you can see, you've now got this row of options up here, which enables you to go between your various class browsers that you've got open. Now, as you'll notice, that this navigation bar has now appeared. So if I want to, let's say, go to this one here, a few utilities, and I want to look at a method that sits on the script runner class, I can navigate that way. Okay, so I don't have to go back to the schema browser and say, no, I want to go to this schema and then I want to get the class browser out. None of that. I can now just drill down. Actually, I should have picked a more densely packed schema with lots of classes and each class having lots of methods. That would be a much better demo. But this is quite a small schema. But if you're trying to find stuff in a very large environment, you pick your schema, you pick your class, pick your method, and you're straight there. Now, the other thing we were going to talk about was floating some screens. Now, yeah. How do you? Well, in this instance here, you're just going to use your drop down box here.
Does it follow key presses?
It does. Yes, it does. If I can. Not really. It's a bit of a shame. We've got a method that's both called run, haven't we? Let's see if we can find something else. Oh, geez. Come on. Oh, whoops. Where are we? I suppose mention that. Scripts will have a lot, will it? Yes. So I could go over here and do. Yeah. Cool. Right, no worries. So what I'm going to do is just have a play around with these panes here. So what you'll see when you bring your mouse over, you'll see this little hand appear, and then, whoops, oh, I've missed it now. Sorry, I should look at it down here rather than try and look at it on the big screen. I've completely messed that one up. Right, let's go back up here. I will go back. One of the things that you can do, you can't see this, all right. That's going to be tricky. Just get my mouse over here then. Right, one of the things that you can do, I have a lot of problems with my neck at the end of this, I think. Am I looking at the, no. Right, on layout, I can always go back to the default JADE layout. All right. Now, I'll see if I get my neck in the right place to do this. Over here, you'll see this little hand, and you can, for example, let me see if I can move this. You can decide how you want it positioned. Okay, so you can play around with this to your heart's content. You can, let's say you want the code here, you want this over on your other screen. This is going to be tricky because you haven't got another screen, so you have to imagine you've got two screens up here. we can just grab this. Oops, there we go. Right. I got that now. Oops, and take it and just take it away and put it over there. Well, you could if that door wasn't there. We can put it over there. And then at the end of the day, you can bring it back in again. Oops.
Does it retain that when you close down and start up again?
Yep. Yep. And also, you can, let's say you like it in this particularly odd fashion, you can go up here and say, I love that layout, absolutely love it to death. I'm going to have it as my default. And then if you bring up another class browser, you'll get it in that ridiculously ugly way. Yes.
Once you float a method,
Yep.
can you drill down into another method inside that same method window?
What you mean, like if I did an F11? I don't know the answer to that question. Do you? Let's try it. All right, this thing seems like a Jedi session all in one go, doesn't it? Okay. So we float it over here. And then I'll have a look at this method here. Oops. And I'll do an F11 on that and see what happens. Whoops. Okay. So what was not here? Good man. Oh well, there we go. Anyway, so at any stage you don't like that structure, you can go back. You can go to your layout. You can clear the default layout, and then you can just take everything back to the default JADE. Okay. So what we wanted to do really in that session is give you a flavour of the sort of changes that are going to come in the IDE. This is really thinking to give you as many different ways of using the product as possible and to fit in with whatever style you have. Okay, right. Yeah. I can finally get my mouse back to this one. They're over here. Right. Okay. Now, at this stage, I'm going to ask Ty to take over, and he's going to explain what our thinking around source control is, and what problems we have with source control, and what problems you have with source control.
Good afternoon.
Oh, sorry. This is Ty, by the way. He's a development team leader.
Hi, I'm Ty. I'm the development team leader. Am I really loud to everybody else? No? I'm going to talk to you a little bit about our building JADE, some development processes that we follow, and then that will lead into where we're going with source control. Yeah. So, what makes a JADE release? Well, now this is going to be familiar to some of you. First, I'll describe what makes a JADE system. So, what makes a JADE system is the database files. These are the .bins and the .dats. And these are where the JADE objects are stored, where the schemas are stored. Every part of persistent data is in the .dat files. Now, most of you know this. Some of you won't. The other thing that makes it part of a JADE database is the runtime, the actual code that runs, the interpreter code, all of the stuff that handles the communications, the database itself, the database engine, and that all lives inside the DLLs and the exe files, which are... So anyway, sorry, you put the DLLs and the exes together with the bins and the DATs, and that makes a JADE system. Now, to make the DLLs and the exes, we have sort of raw source code, and that's in C++, C#. We've got a little bit of managed C++, and maybe a little bit of a few other things in there that don't bear mentioning. And these are stored in flat files on disk somewhere, and we edit these in typically Visual Studio. Visual Studio is a great IDE. We've got a great IDE too. Thank you for your little laugh over there. Don't worry, my technical expertise is better than my comic stylings. So we edit these in Visual Studio. We write our C++ C code as well. And that's where all the classes and your methods and your functions, all of your code stored. Then you hit the button in Visual Studio. Once you've finished putting enough, I think you put enough bugs in, Visual Studio builds it for you, outspits some more DLLs executables, and then we put them together with the database files, try and bring up JADE, and if JADE comes up, hey, that's a good start. So I've mentioned, okay, so these files, I said they're flat files. So they're just straight text essentially. And now we've probably got thousands of files, right? This is fairly typical for a big project like JADE. Thousands of files, maybe tens of thousands of files. And they're all stored in source control. Now the source control system we use currently is Subversion. It's what we've been using for many years. It doesn't necessarily meet all of our requirements, but we can talk about that a little bit later. So they are under source control, and we're not using a continuous integration process for our builds at the moment. We're probably about 90% of the way. Each night, some timers kick off a bunch of build scripts, and they do a source update. So it pulls all of the source from the main repository down onto our build machine. Visual Studio does its compile, does its magic, spits out its DLLs and its executables. We also take a backup of our main development environment for whichever version is being built at the time, restore that backup, work some magic on the database, put them together, and you've got your overnight build, as John just mentioned. Now, one thing I didn't mention just before is that, so we've got the bins and the DATs. The bins are where root schema and JADE schema are stored, and all of the objects and code associated with that. The .dats, that's all the user data, user schemas, that kind of thing. The formats of those files are exactly the same. There's no real reason for the different name, but it's a sort of conveniently separates your data from our data. Now, so what makes a JADE release? Well, a JADE release is an overnight build that's been through a release process. Now, the release process really begins when it's time to cut a service pack. So what you need, obviously, is you need a daily build of JADE, which has passed all your regression tests. It's passed all of the new feature tests that you've added, or at least that you understand the failures, right? So, enough said. So, everybody has a release process. Now, whether or not your release process is that we just make it up on the fly every time we want to do a software release, that's still a release process. It's not a great one, and I hope nobody does that, but there are shops that do. So we've got a well-defined release process. It probably takes about, this is just to create a release candidate. Once the release candidate has been created, we're talking several weeks of intensive testing, all of the pars, all of the bugs that get patched into that release. We attempt to test them. Some might be impossible to reproduce, and so they're not conducive to testing. We add every new test that we make to our bank of overnight tests. It runs, we've got a bank of 15, 20 computers. We run every operating system that we support in multiple configurations, and they do nothing but sit there and put the database, put the JADE through its paces. So once we've gone through a release process, we get a release. Once it's been qualified, what we have is a release. So we've got JADE 2016 down here, and I'm just going to explain the version numbers. So the 16 is the major version. We've got a field that isn't used, so that's always 0 from now on. It used to be, we had JADE 6.3, 7.0, 7.1, but as has been explained before, the distinction between those numbers became increasingly arbitrary. So now that field means nothing. The green number there, 01, that's think of it as it used to be the consolidated cut level, it's now the service pack level. Although one slightly awkward little fact you'll notice is that service pack 1 will be number 2. That's life. So then the blue is the hotfix or the build number. So every time it comes through a hotfix, we do a full daily build of JADE. Please excuse me. And every time we do a daily build, the build number is every time we cut, every time the overnight process builds a hotfix, it bumps that build number. So when you download a hotfix, you'll notice that it's a very small selection of files, and at least some of those files will have the build number of the hotfix. If it has a lot more files, it's usually because of prior dependencies. And so those previous files will have the old build numbers, and only the new files, the ones that have actually been patched in that hotfix, will have the new build numbers. And we do this to minimize panic and to minimize thin client downloads, essentially. So every time you download our hotfix, I know some people need to give 6 weeks notice before a thin client, any of the thin client files are changed. So we try not to do that unless we have to. Okay, so what makes a JADE version? So in this diagram, the branching in this diagram not only represents the conceptual branching that we have where we've released a new version or put a new version out, but every branch in this diagram represents also a physical branch in our source control. So we can see JADE 2018 over there, that's a major branch. It might be considered the master branch. Now, it's not actually JADE 2018 at the moment. It won't be 2018 until we stop development on 2018. You can think of it as JADE 3000 at the moment. It's the future. So we've got our major branch across for JADE 2016. Every service pack from now on will be taken from this red branch, this orange branch. This is the future of 2016. So as you can see, we've got 16.0.02 over here, and that's service pack 1. That's been, what were you told? It would be released in the next few weeks. It's been created. It's going through its qualification process now, and once that's finished, we'll release it. So this green arrow down here is 1601. That's the first, that was the initial release of JADE 2016. And hotfix 1 up there, or hotfix 1 build 1, sits up there in blue. And you get the idea. So one thing to note is that there's one database at the end of every arrow. So there's a 2018 development environment, there's a 1601 development environment, and there's a 1602 and a 2016 development environment. Not only does each branch of our raw source code sit in source control, but we attempt to the wrapping. Yeah, no, it's a good business, so I hear. Can you hear me? Okay, so one thing to note also is that the 10,000 odd files that I mentioned before exist at each point in this branch. So there's now that's not exactly true, there's some version of them that exists, but it's possible to reconstruct a JADE system from every single branch of this tree. Now this is what I've been referring to as my insane Christmas tree. This is just a small window of the problem. So every consolidated release has its arrow, and there's numerous hotfixes coming off of each consolidated release. Each major version has its arrow, with each yeah. So keeping these all straight is a bit of a problem. And when we talk about a hotfix, what is a hotfix? Well, it can be several different things. We can patch the source, the C++ files, as we said before, the DLLs, executables, but they can also include JADE fixes. And so that's in the JADE database, which is not under source control. Every night, we do a nightly extract of that version, and it gets banked into one of these branches. But it's not really under source control. So a patch might include a patch to 5 or 6 files, plus some JADE methods. Now, doing a hotfix, let's say we're doing a hotfix into, I don't know, let's not point at the tree, 717, right? From 717, we put a hotfix into 717, we've got to put one into 718, 719, 16, 1601, and very soon 1602 as well, because obviously we care about you, and you shouldn't be able to then upgrade to a system and have that problem occur again. So just then I mentioned 5 different versions. We'd also have to patch into the 18 version, the 16 version, and the 7.1 version. So that might include patches to 5 or 6, 8 different branches. That's quite a high cognitive load for anybody. And that's just, we'll just say the C++ changes. That's quite easy. The source control system sort of handles that for us. But if we're talking about JADE methods as well, we might be talking schema loads, we might be talking manually bringing up the IDE and making changes that way. It's a complicated process, as most of you will know. All right, so why have I told you this? Well, I thought you might find it interesting to see how the other half lives, so to speak. I thought, well, probably nobody's ever told you this kind of stuff before, certainly not from us. And I really believe in open information flow. If we communicate freely and openly amongst ourselves, we can come together and solve our problems. We can work together and come up with better ideas. The other reason I've told you is that I really want to emphasize that when you talk to us about your source management problems, we really hear you. Because we have them too, right? We are with you on this source control journey. So having said that, what are we doing? In 2016, we had a workshop where we gathered users from all corners of the earth to talk about their problems and their current processes, their problems with their processes, and what they wanted to see for the future. And the outcomes of that source control workshop, and it was essentially universal, was that the workflows that we currently have don't support us as well as we want them to. Maintaining different release versions of a JADE system can be dangerous. Not dangerous, difficult. And the other outcome was that JADE shouldn't implement a source control system within itself. For those of you who are here that were there, I mean, we talked about the initiatives or the features that we've put in to try and address this problem before. There's patch versioning, deltas, some other features never quite made it to market, but we've never had a unified story to help you along that process. Now, that's good, but telling us what we shouldn't do doesn't exactly tell us what we should do. So, if we take a step back, we can see that actually, over the past 5 years, decade, the industry's largely come to its own solution. And that's the way we're going to go too. So I'll just show you a couple of examples of some tools that we use in-house. So this is a product called Madcap Flare, which our documentation team uses. And there's not a very clear distinction between the three images I've got, but essentially, these products provide some kind of plugin which will interface you to a source control system, a third-party source control system. So we've got a setup screen here where you say what type of source control system have you got and where is it? How do I interface with it? Then over here we've got our context menus which show up on our objects. They say to carry out the various features, the various actions of that source control system as relevant to the system that you're working in. And here's just a ribbon that shows mainly the same thing. So Visual Studio has the same kind of deal. They've got native integration with a source control system called Git and TFS, of course. So after we open up Visual Studio, we have a solution. That's the name for the whole project in Visual Studio. We can add our solution to source control. And then we open up a context menu on some file that we've changed. And we say, send this to source control, please. And we've got various other options for managing, performing some of the management features of that repository. Right, so what are we doing? Well, we're going to provide some client functionality to interface with third-party source control systems. What does it look like? It's going to look much like it looks in Flair and Visual Studio. The object of the game is to have a poised user interface so you don't break your workflow when it comes time to interacting with the actual source control system. So you might be editing a method, you might be done with editing that method, open up your context menu and say, actually commit that to the source control now. We aren't going to be building this around any particular workflow. That is something to emphasize. What we want is to support industry standard workflows within JADE. We're certainly not going to privilege our own workflow, which I gave a small and garbled explanation of 10 minutes ago, because it doesn't work for us as well as we want it to either. We force our workflow to work for us. It doesn't make things particularly easy for us. That's all right, you got a bigger laugh than I did before. Right, so what does JADE do? And what doesn't it do? Well, JADE's... This is obviously aimed at the people who have some familiarity with source control systems. You have to have some domain knowledge to understand this, sorry. So JADE's role is to use the working copy as an intermediary between JADE and the source control system. Essentially what this means is that you'll have a copy of the repository stored on some computer somewhere. It'll be, the schema elements will be in flat files, maybe not flat, but they'll be in files on the disk somewhere, and one JADE development system at any one point will be able to reflect the state of that repository. So what should JADE do? Well, JADE should be able to streamline some of the tasks. Now, what you notice is that there are a given number of, there's a subset of actions which are universal to all source control systems. You've got adding things to the repository, committing your changes to the repository, that kind of business. And JADE's role will not be to perform the advanced functions of the source control system. JADE is not the source control system. We're not managing the source control for you. You have to get your own source repository. What might you need to change? Well, you might need a source control system if you want to use this feature. We aren't going to build a source control system into JADE. It's not what we're good at. There are whole teams of people out there that have built super great source control systems. We build an IDE and its associated functionality. So, one thing that might be a paradigm shift is that a single JADE development environment does not then become the single source of truth for your organization's code. Now, not everybody works like this at the moment, and if you don't, it's fine. Now, I'm conscious that Henry mentioned this morning that his JADE database is a single source of truth. Now, he's talking about his user data. I'm talking about the schema definitions and the source code. It's independent of user data to an extent. A JADE development environment, some JADE development environment, as I've said, will be a reflection of the repository at a given point in time. And you should be able to have many JADE environments being different reflections of that repository at different points in time as well. So the schema elements will be stored in flat files. Currently the schemas don't exist anywhere until they are extracted. Right? We don't store the schema on the entity, we just generate it on the fly. That's going to change. It needs to be on the file in the repository. And you might need to change some development processes. But to utilize any new tool, you're going to have to change some processes somewhere. Any questions?
So, will JADE have, say, the concept of annotating the source code for blame kind of purposes? You know, like who changed what to blame and when and so on?
JADE isn't going to do that for you. That is the purview of the source control system. Source control systems also have what you're talking about essentially is the feature called blame, which, you know, it's got a good name. So you can view a unified history of any particular file at any point in time, and it will tell you who's changed that line. All of that information will be stored by the source control system. JADE is going to be pretty dumb. It's just going to push the changes in the source code and everything else out to the system. The system will store it.
Sure, but it's common in IDEs to have, say, a view down the side of the entity that shows who changed which line.
We could. We've not finalized exactly the extent of the client functionality. We're working at the model we're working with at the moment is at least all of the basic functions. Being able to read any particular source control system's view of the world in the type of information it sends back to you. It's starting to sound a bit complex.
Surely the way to go towards it anyway.
Yeah, maybe. And you know, if our first approach doesn't work, we'll try it again. Now, something I didn't mention, but I should mention, is that our release processes and our development processes aren't particularly iterative. So we don't have an early release process that we can push things out to some customers, get their feedback, and then make changes based on that feedback. Because we're actually an application framework. The moment we push something out to the public, it gets sucked up into your applications. It's difficult to change it then. Now that's the core functionality, the language. It doesn't need to be the IDE though. The IDE doesn't need to be as static as the actual language and runtime. So if something doesn't work, we might be able to update our development tools slightly more regularly. Diego had a question. Troy, sorry.
So the JADE database has its end files, its written does the source control settings. So if I make commits and changes to classes and I try to roll the source control back, how's any idea how JADE's going to handle that? Class structure versus conditions.
Yeah, so the changes that you make will be through the JADE IDE, so that I'm not sure I understand the question exactly.
So if you undo a change and then you get a new class definition that doesn't contain that field,
Yep.
will that then go and delete that property of that class inside the ID?
Yeah. I mean, JADE's got to be able to read the definitions from the repository and reflect that. And if you need to do a reorg to get there, you're going to have to do a reorg.
Well, actually, I've had two questions. One, just following on from that one, how are you going to cope with, or how do you envision the cope with renames?
I'm obviously not aware of the problem that you're aware of.
Well, just if you're just writing out a definition and someone renames it and renames a property or class in an ID, they'll think it's a new class.
Well, not if there are rename operations promulgated to the repository. Yeah, so ultimately, I see this as tying into some kind of patch history. I don't want to use that word because there's already a feature called patch history or whatever, but we should be able to store that information. Look, we can talk about it afterwards.
Actually, the first question I had was actually related to the developer tools part that you talked about.
Yep.
Where you've got the JADE platform and the JADE IDE.
Yep.
Are you guys sort of thinking or on a path towards being able to sort of split the release cycles of those? You could have the platform database changes language as a base platform and then the release changes to the IDE on top of that?
It's not something that's been formally mooted, but it's definitely something that we should be thinking about going forwards here. No, we're not de-implementing anything. Yes.
Source method source control for methods and mentioned properties. Is that going to be true for all schema elements? I'm thinking packages, and external database definitions, basically your whole schema completely extracted so you can make the master is your repo and you can populate your ID from that everything that's in a schema definition?
Yeah.
Cool. Like that answer. Thank you.
All right. I might, if there are no further questions, you can all come up and grill me during afternoon tea.
The first session after lunch is going to be John talking about the ATCG, which is one of the major new features in 2018. And then we'll have a wee chat about JADE and communication.
Cool. No, I don't think I need that. No. Okay. So one of the areas that we're going to look at is testing. We're pretty, as a plant, very committed to unit testing. And so we're quite committed to getting unit testing into JADE and for you to be using it. The unit testing feature that's in JADE continues to be improved, and we've got some new features in for 2018. And we're looking to see, to grow that particular feature. So if you're using unit testing for your applications and you've got any, you've got some suggestions, please put some JADEs in, because I think this is an area where we'll see quite a bit of improvement in releases going forward. We make the Windows ID for controls available to you so it can ease the use of third-party testing tools, which will be in 2018. And the other thing is, for some time, we've had our own internal testing tool called ATCG, and we've just decided that we use it. It has some limitations, but we get a lot of value out of it, and we felt that maybe we would like to share that, and we'll talk about how we're going to do that as well. But that's a feature that's going to be in 2018. Now, so this internal testing tool is based on a JADE feature called method tracking, which came in when did method tracking come in? 7.1? Anybody know? Oh, no. Anyway, it came in earlier. No, actually, it must have been 6. It must have come in 6.3, I think. The idea with method tracking is it enables you to capture just before the initiation of a method and just after, so you can record all the parameters that were sent and what the return type was, all that sort of thing, the actualoid of the object, all that sort of thing. So it says there the receiver, the parameters, the return value, and so forth. You can actually record that. And of course, once you've got that, especially if you've got that for the GUI methods, you can just build up a sequence of actions that replay what you originally recorded. So the interesting thing about ATCG, so you do the recording, it records all this info, it stores all this information, and then what it does is it builds JADE code to replay it. So you can modify that JADE code. And we'll do about that in the demo, I think. Okay. So it basically has a record and replay mechanism. So essentially what you do is you put ATCG comes as two schemas. You put them below your GUI schema, and then you do some modifications to the ATCG schema to say, this is my app, this is the main form, the main menu. And then you can run the control app from ATCG and press record. It'll bring up the first screen and you go through whatever actions you want to go through. And then to stop the record, you do the generate, and that goes away. It generates JADE code. It then loads that back in to the ATCG schema. So you haven't got a database of tests. You've actually got it in metadata, so it's actually part of a schema, so you can load it into any release and test. Okay, yes, so because it makes JADE code, small changes that you might make don't force you to re-record, which has always been the bugbear, that's the right expression, of testing tools in the past. You know, some minor change you make and you go, all these tests are no longer valid, I've got to re-record them all. It's all a bit of a pain. So you can do that. The other thing, of course, is that you can use these methods to play the transaction multiple times. So you could just iterate through changing the key data that might be the key to a collection so you don't get duplicates, and you can just build up a load test if you want. Okay, so there's quite a bit you can do with this. So basically it comprises of two schemas. You load them underneath your GUI schema, and I think actually I've said all this, haven't I? So when the recording's finished, it generates the code, and they just creates a new class inside the ATCG test code schema, and a collection of methods which get executed to replay the test. Okay, and you can just modify the data because you can modify the test because it's all in JADE code. Now, here's a new departure for us. We're not going to ship ATCG as part of the product. We're going to open source it so that you can do with it as you wish. We're going to make it available via GitHub. We're going to make the documentation available via GitHub. We are hoping to build a community so that people put their suggestions and even suggested code changes into GitHub. We would look at it and say, that's great, we'll put it into the base product, and that's what we'd see go. Or we might say, looks a bit specialist for me, but another user might say, I've got exactly the same problem you have and use your code. So that's what we're hoping to do, to make this into a community of people using this source to test their code. And I'll say that's quite a departure for us. We've never done that before. Okay, so a demo. So a bit more fun we did last time. Right, let's see if I can find it first. Where are we? Let's take that down. And that down. Oh, here we go. Let's see if I can take all of this over here. Right. Okay. What have we got? Let's have a look. So here you'll see. No, actually, you won't see that because that's in the way, isn't it? Let's just pull that bit out of the way a little. Okay. So Oh, I've done it again. Sorry. For those of you on the JADE course, remember we built a banking app? That's what you do on the JADE course. Well, this banking model schema and view schema they're the completed version. That's what it should look like when you finish the JADE course. So I've used that as an example. So you see underneath there, you'll see the two schemas, ATCG generate schema and ATCG test code schema. That is the ATCG product. So you load them in, and you'll see in the class browser here, you'll see ATCG profile. Well, that's the generic one that you that comes with the ATCG. You then build a profile that relates to your application. So the banking profile class there will have methods in it which say which is your form you want to start. And then for every test that you record becomes a subclass of that class. So these ones down here, so we go into test profile 1. Oops, go away. Where's my mouse? So these, you'll see every test will have a startup and a run test. They're the things that get the test going, and they'll build up a collection of all the methods that need to be executed into an array and just work through them one at a time, and it will reproduce the test. Okay, so let's see if we can do a demo. Okay, so I've lost my mouse again. Where am I? Over here. Here we go. So we want to run the control app. So there you go. So it'll be open source. You'll be able to skin this so it looks really good. Right, so it is. It's fairly straightforward. There's a button there that says start recording. Now, what that's going to do is bring up your app, which is this is a really basic app. It's what we hope people build in 5 days of a JADE development course when they don't know JADE at the beginning. So that's not that sophisticated. But right, so I'm now recording here. So I'll go up here and I'm just going to add a customer. That's all we're going to do. And this is going to have this theory that some psychiatrists should actually work out where we pick test data from. Did I do it? Did I? Yeah. Oh, this is my favourite piece of test data. Yes, here we go. There we go. With a customer. All right. Okay. So that's that. We've added the customer. Now over here, I'm now going to say, okay, I'm going to call this, I don't know, test 45, and I'm going to generate and load it. So what it does, it will, take a bit of time here. It'll say I'm generating, and it's loaded the class test 48. So we go back into, I'll just get rid of this output viewer here. You go back now, you'll see there's a class there called test 45. Okay, and these are all the methods necessary to execute it. So if I go into, I'll get this right. What do I do? Was it? Did I do button click twice? I don't know. Let's have a look down here. Did I? Oh, let's go. Maybe it's the first one then. What am I looking at? That one? Oh, here we go. That's what I'm looking for. So I'm going to go down here somewhere. Speak to me. Oh, sorry, I'm finding this really awkward from here. Let's go up here. Let's move this somewhere where I can actually. Right, let's look down the bottom here. That's what I wanted to look at. Here's my one Let's Be Avenue, and I'm going to change that to 2. All right. And I'll just compile it like you do any other method. So now the methods that are going to redo this have got the data changed. So when I replay it, we should have a different address. So if I go back into my app, I select the test. Speak to me. I've forgotten how. I can't even see it from here. So, I want the replay test. I want this. Where are we? This is. Yes. What do I do? Oh, hang on a sec. Let's start again. Let's stop that again. Let's get myself organised here. John, pull yourself together. Right. Right. Oh, I played the wrong test. Right. For some obscure reason. Oh, dear, dear. Oh, here we go. I don't want that one. This is really. Well, yeah. There's a box, a combo box just here for me to select it from, and it's disappeared. Oh God, how embarrassing! So the idea is that you select from here the test. In this case, it's selected test 1, and I replay that. I'll get another test that's replayed. So I don't quite know what has gone on here. Right. This is so embarrassing. Yeah, there's a bit missing off this form this time round. Right. This is don't know. I'll have to give that some thought. I'll come back to that demo.
John, I think we had this bug is when it says available replay classes.
Yeah.
The checkbox list is not displayed.
That's right.
Yeah, click in there, they're in there. Yeah. There's a hotfix for us there, number 23.
Oh, right. But it was you. It was working. Like. It's like, you know, sod's law it's going to happen when you're. So you're saying if I click in here.
Yeah, so double click or whatever the action is.
Yeah, it's double click, but it's not.
It's not working. Okay, yeah, do it on the lower one and it will. No, in the grey bit.
Oh, here?
Yeah. Just psychically figure out where the tests are.
Oh, this is so embarrassing. That was.
Is that Nathan Fool's joke?
No.
It drove us crazy. It absolutely drove us crazy.
Well. So. Yeah. No, that's it. Yeah. Thank you. I have actually run through this test about half a dozen times, and it's worked fine. Today, in front of all of you, it's not going to work. Well, that is bizarre. That is bizarre. Anyway, I shall recover my composure. I have absolutely no idea where that bug came from, and I shouldn't really have. Yeah. Anyway, the idea is you can replay the test, and it would have picked up. It would have put in, instead of 1 Let's BM, you had to put in 2, and you'd have run the test that way. So you've seen that before, have you?
Yeah.
Because I haven't.
On the exposures list, we had it.
Oh, right.
So, but,
Yeah. Craig, have you?
So, John, is this restricted to thin client apps, or could I test my REST API app using the same system?
The actual app runs as a single user rather than a thin client. Could you use it for testing REST services? No, because you're running a form, and it has to do with the forms and the controls. Yeah. While I'm not sure what I'm going to do here. I think after Shane's presentation later on this afternoon, if anybody wants to have a look, I'll bring it up on my laptop and I'll show you it there. Okay. There we go. There we go. Right, now let's get on to a much more interesting subject as such. One of the things we talked about earlier is giving you more options for your interaction with web applications. Now, in a previous life, as some of you know it, I was the development manager for the logistics group, which is now a separate company. And one of the problems they had is that there were players out there in the logistics industry who wanted to know when events occurred inside a JADE system. So inside the terminal operating system that is JADE Logistics, there is a structure for events. So let's say, for example, when a container clears customs, it generates an event, and if you had subscribed, you might be able to get a text on your phone and that sort of thing. So we had that type of interaction going. But what we wanted to do is have, instead of web applications that were interested in these events polling the JADE system, we wanted a two-way communication so that we could just send things out when we wanted to. So effectively, what we wanted is a web application and JADE having an open TCP/IP connection, you know, where we're both listening. We're not, neither of us do anything active. We don't have to keep putting a hand up saying, are we there yet? We just wait, as you would in a TCP/IP connection. I'm listening, and when a message comes through, you deal with it. That's what we wanted. And that's now available in the web, the web environment, and it's called WebSockets. So by providing an interface inside JADE to WebSockets, this will enable us to push things out to another web application when an event occurs. So we don't have to wait to be polled. We don't have to wait for a web services message or REST message to come in. We can push it out when we want to. They can connect to us when they want to. So that was the reason, that need to push information out. That was the reason for us looking at WebSockets. But now we've got there, it opens up a lot of possibilities. First off, let me just, just get a nice definition of WebSockets. Having copied this definition of WebSockets onto this slide, I now realise that actually it's a bit pompous and I should have used my own words. But effectively, let's look at some of the words here. It's long held. Basically, it means that we open a communication channel. That's what it means by long held. It's bidirectional, it's fully duplex. What it means is it's like two humans. We're having a chat, we talk when we want to talk. If we don't, we sulk, and we don't talk. And you know, so it's completely autonomous in that sense. The messages are pretty instantly distributed. It's very fast because there's no hundreds of layers in the way. It's at a very low layer in terms of the network messaging. So it's a neat little tool. So to give you an idea of some of the things you might like to think about doing with this is if you were thinking, oh, I'm going to take a little bit of my application and make it a web application over here, then I've got to build the web front end. I've then got to move my code over here, perhaps do a new application in C#, all that sort of thing. Here, what you could do is build the user interface as a web application and then just send a message down the line to JADE whenever you want something and make use of all your business rules that exist in your JADE application. So there's lots of opportunities here with WebSockets. I expect people to think about this for quite a while, and then I expect to see some really innovative things come out of some of your applications using this tool. So for me, this is perhaps, I think I might say this is the most exciting bit of 2018. Okay, so where are we going post 2018? Yep.
How does it work licensing wise? Do you need a concurrent connection to your database open the whole time?
No, it won't. It won't. Like, you know, will it use up a JADE license?
Yes.
No is the answer to that question. No.
Yeah, so if you had, say, 10 web monitors running, you could have 1,000 clients out there with a permanent connection at the whole time.
Yes.
Yes.
Just as you can now with apps, web servers.
Yeah. Mm. Cool. Okay, so going forward, what else are we going to look at? In many respects, most of the streams going forward post 2018 are very similar to what we've been doing already. So we'll continue to do the type of changes that you're asking for via JADE IDE. I mean, that will be a constant stream of work for us. We'll look at new technologies as they arise and as we think they're relevant. And obviously WebSockets are a good example of that. And I think if we look at 2016, 2018, we have focused fairly heavily on the developer. And now we're going to look at other people that are involved in the whole process. So the operations manager, the guy who's doing the deploys, making sure that their backups are okay, making sure, you know, doing the SGS takeovers and all that. So those sorts of people are going to give some thought about making their lives easier. We're going to take a bit of the hassle out of archiving data. One of the things that we've done in the past is partitions for data files and put the older version, the older data into partition files. We're now going to make that a little bit easier for you to use. And we'll continue to improve the development for both users in the IDE and users of your application. So in terms of operations, notice I've said change in releases rather than upgrade. I think we want to get away from the concept that this is an onerous task. Oh, what happened there? Huh. Boop, boop, boop. Panic, panic. Let's get this back. We're going to come over here. Come on, speak to me. Right. I never touched anything. Thank you, Karen. Okay. So I don't know why. I've just decided that we won't call it upgrade, we'll call it changing releases. We want to make that less of an event. Obviously, some of the upgrades to 7.1 were not as pain-free as we'd have liked. But certainly the upgrade to 2016 was a lot less painless, and we want to continue down that path. We want to make the utilities that we have, you know, things like certifiers and so forth, we'll make all of those not only quicker but also easier to use. And even the act of installing a version of JADE, we want to have a good look at that. We're going to have a good look at Install Shield, which is what we currently use. And we want to get as much automation into these operational activities as possible. Okay, archiving data, yes. One of the things that, for those of you who've used partitions, you realise you've got to bring the partitions back in to do reorgs and things like that. We're going to rethink all of that. So, good one. For the developers, we've done some language changes in 16 and in 2018. We wanted to just widen the picture out a bit here, and we want to be able to offer more from the compiler, look at things like warnings in the compiler and that sort of thing. So we're trying to focus on the compiler as much as the language. And obviously we'll look at further extensions to the language as well. In terms of the IDE, we've made a number of changes in 2016 and in 2018, but one of the things that we haven't paid a lot of attention to is the workflow through the IDE, and for that, I think we're going to need the help of people like Shane and give a real UX focus on the flow through the IDE, which I actually thought was going to flow directly into Shane, but actually we're going to do Q&A now, aren't we?
Take a moment to talk about communication. Firstly, the JADE product feedback and new feature suggestion interface. Can I give a quick show of hands who's been on to JADE? Okay, so good chunk. And show of hands who's voted or put something in? Yeah, much the same. So I do encourage you to go on to JADE. So it's, I think we saw a couple of screenshots before. It's our preferred way of getting suggestions about the product. We do take it really seriously. We have a JADE council that meets to review those suggestions. When you look at JADE...
We have special costumes as well. That's sold out. Yeah.
When we look at JADE 2018, 8 out of the top 10 voted for JADEs have been included into 2018. The most reliable way to get a feature into JADE is to get it into JADE and get it voted on. So I can't encourage you enough. The other thing, of course, is that because it's designed from the start to be a collaborative environment, you get the chance to build ideas up, and we've been finding it really useful to see the layering of ideas from the original contributor, then with some feedback back even from our internal people, but also from other customers about how that idea could be modified or enhanced. The JADE platform, kind of interestingly, is based on some technology we originally developed internally. We call it the Innovation Hub, which we used as a kind of internal ideas box for JADE software. That has been, we're still running it internally for ideas within JADE software, nothing to do with JADE the product, just like, you know, we should have webcams in the car park so we don't have to drive around to find the car park's full, that sort of idea. We have that running in a customer site as their internal ideas box, and we've got 2 more customers looking at running it as their internal ideas box as well. So that sort of suggestion platform is available as a very lightweight product for that sort of thing. We're using it in terms of products, obviously the JADE implementation, which has been quite successful for JADE. It's also acting as the automated or community suggestion folder for JADE Logistics, for our Electricity Authority registry application. So all the lines companies and electricity retailers are now hooked up to effectively a copy of JADE, putting in suggestions about that. And we're rolling it out for our anti-money laundering and case management system. So this is turning out to be quite a high-use suggestion box platform. It's now multi-user, multi-tenanted, so it's trivially cheap to run. If any of you are interested in the idea of running an internal suggestion box, either internally within your companies as we do as the Innovation Hub, or for your products, then I'd be very happy to have a chat with you about that. We can do that pretty easily. The other thing I wanted to cover off briefly was in terms of emails and communications from us. Everybody here has had their email address captured. I'm sure we disclosed that as part of a privacy thing. And if you got an invitation or you were forwarded an invitation, there's a subscribe button on that as well. If you are concerned that you're not getting communication from us, there's also a subscribe button on our website. So if you go onto the JADE World main website, go through to the JADE product area, then you are able to subscribe to get all our communications. What I have become aware of, or we've kind of kicked around, is that we have a couple of mailing lists. So there's a mailing list for general product communications, which is where the JADE newsletter goes and where the invitations to this user group have gone. There's also a mailing list specifically for customers of our JADE Care product. And there's a mailing list, I believe, a technical developers mailing list, which is a little bit more obscure, which is where we send, for example, notifications of urgent hotfixes. If we found a hotfix that could be causing potentially corruption in a database or something, we'll generally email out that that hotfix is there and should be applied pronto. We'll come up with a communications plan to get you onto the right lists, but that will almost certainly go out through the general communication list. So I guess the short version is, if you don't know if you're subscribed to the short list, as long as we've got your email from this event, you are. If otherwise, if there's any doubt, just go to the website and resubscribe, because it will just dedupe and be fine. We want you to get all the information. We spend a lot of time and effort trying to create the stuff. Some of it's important, all of it's important. So it would be great for you to get it. So just make sure your emails are registered with us, and we'll make sure you're on the right lists, and we'll send out the communication to you. We're going to just flip the agenda a little bit now, because I think it makes sense to cover off the rest of the product stuff. So we'll do the product Q&A now, and then we'll end just after that with Shane's presentation on UX and UI. So what I'd like to do now is take any remaining questions around the product, the 2018, forthcoming 2018 release, and product direction and so forth, as well as any hangover questions around features like source control.
So is it going to be possible to go directly from 7.1 to 2018 without having to go via 2016?
No.
We are not planning for that to be possible, no. But anything is possible given the right motivation.
Yeah, they're both binary releases. So.
There's nothing to stop you doing them. There's nothing to stop you doing them all in one go, right? So it's not a well, it's not a migration for a start. It's just essentially a binary drop, and we run some fix-up scripts. So there's nothing to stop you taking your system down, going from 7.1 to 2016, and then straight to 2018. You can do that. It may make some things a little bit more complex. Finding where the behavior may have changed. If you encounter a behavior change, that might be more complex, but there's nothing to stop you doing that. But there isn't a direct upgrade from 7.1 to 2018.
Just on JADE IDE, I think it's great what you guys have done there. It's really opened it up for a lot of people to bring in some good ideas. But just stepping it up a little bit, have you given any thought to providing a bit more feedback on the ideas that have been binned as to why they've been binned, but more so for the ideas that you're taking forward? Maybe provide some implementation details on how you've interpreted it, what you're going to do in the product, and maybe allow the community to comment on those?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. We have already had some discussion around that communication back. After the JADE Council, generally the ideas that are not proceeded with, the responses are at least timely, if not detailed. The issue is where we are going to go forward with them, we know there's kind of they go into a black hole. So that's something we've talked about. We'll try and put some more effort into that. It's not our intent to be deliberately obscure or opaque about this. It's more that often we don't actually know. So we might look at an idea and say, yes, we'd like to do this. We need to go away and do some research to find out how much effort it is. Is it something we can slip into 2018, or is it something we need to schedule further out? And so it tends to be, yes, we're going to do it, but we don't have enough detail. But the communication back to the submitter, I admit, is very weak. We will take a note to consider that. I also take your point on the ones we decide not to proceed with. I think at the moment we're just saying we're not proceeding with them.
No, and sometimes we haven't had many, but I normally go back and say I'm closing this because.
Because? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. You've probably never had one closed anyway, have you, John?
Well, really? What did I? Oh yeah, I think we did. Yeah, it's too broad. Yeah. Oh, the idea. Oh, that's right. We said.
I'd like the product to be better.
Yeah. Yeah, he's going to put another one in now. I want the JADE development environment, the manager to get.
I'm sorry, one thing I didn't cover then I should have mentioned is, in a sort of meta way, we don't currently have an easy way to provide feedback on the JADE product itself. So people have been generally feeding those in. So even though it's the JADE, we do get suggestions in there that relate to JADE itself rather than JADE. And that's absolutely fine. We will deal with those internally and move them to the JADE backlog.
Yeah. So and there is work happening on JADE. There is a young lady making. Yeah. Okay.
You guys could just pass them on.
Sure. So there was some discussion earlier about forums. And you mentioned the JADE forum is a bit clunky. Have you considered maybe any questions should be answered on Stack Overflow versus the JADE forum would be perhaps a better approach?
That sounds good to me. Okay, well, that is a great suggestion. We'll go away and try and think of any reason why we shouldn't do that.
Yeah.
And if we can't, after a brief period, we'll do that. That seems like a really cool idea. I appreciate that. Thanks, Craig. Great idea.
No other questions? Cindy? Hi, this is on ATCG. So with ATCG, I understand that it's a method tracking, it's based on method tracking, but does it also have data driving capability? Like, if we specify a location where it can fetch the data, the input data, and then go and use that to process the methods, does it do that?
You'll have to write some code. I still think I'm still on. You'll have to write some code around to call the methods that you saw created.
Right.
You just have to call them iteratively, going through a flat file with different data.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Sorry, it's a bit specific, but can you clarify a bit around the performance side of things you mentioned around collections, how it would benefit some sites but not others?
Yes. The process. Are you going to answer?
I was going to wait for your answer.
What a fist I'm making it, you'll have to go. Yeah. The methodology we use for storing collections in the files, we've found a more efficient way of doing that, but that will vary depend on how your collections are structured. So how can I say this? If they're quite tightly packed, the indexes, then you might see better performance gains than if they're not. Is that a reasonable explanation?
Yeah. Did I answer?
It didn't sound very enthusiastic. Great answer, John, was what I was looking for.
Great answer, John.
Oh, that's better. That's better. Yeah. Did that help? Yeah.
We've improved the reblocker so that you can reblock your collections that way. It's much faster. And we've improved essentially the layout of collections on disk.
Oh, yeah, sorry. No, this one.
I was following on from the ATCG stuff. There was also the load performance testing schema in that we've seen before, which is something that I don't know if everyone's got that, but that was something that previously we looked at trying to combine that with the ATCG stuff.
We haven't actually decided at this moment in time, but I can't, while I'm standing here, see any reason why we can't open source that as well, but we haven't done that yet.
Yeah, because it'd be a good idea to combine those as an open sourcing.
Yeah. You're only allowed 2 questions.
It's a quick one. It's a quick one. JADE 218, when's it coming out?
It's currently scheduled for the end of September 2018.
Just thinking about how best to phrase this. Looking at infrastructure that JADE's running on, customers moving to cloud, moving to solid state disk, etc. Is there any guidance published in terms of performance benefit for different architectures, for different types of storage, etc.?
I mean, at this moment in time, there isn't. We don't have like a white paper on that subject.
The JADE Care Group. So our JADE Care Group is the group that's tasked with operational excellence. So they have a better than the people who would normally be involved in those sorts of discussions. From the point of view of your direct question, and the question behind the question, then we are constantly and actively looking at ways to run better in cloud type environments, and we see increasing number of JADE systems running on Amazon and Azure. We've previously said that we will remain agnostic to the cloud suppliers, and that remains the case. Obviously, Microsoft in particular put a lot of pressure on us to favour Azure, but at the moment we're intent on remaining agnostic, but also of doing things that make it easier to run operationally in the cloud. And we would like to look at things like increasing the ability to scale horizontally easily in the cloud rather than relying on JADE doing it itself.
Sorry, since two questions are allowed. Also, whether or not there's been any thought given to partitions or, so like Azure, for instance, blob storage for, say, frozen partitions, those sort of things. So for customers that are talking towards sort of hybrid storage, hybrid cloud.
We currently have partitions, frozen partitions, and blobs.
Yes, well, yeah. So what we're looking at doing, and I mentioned there about archiving data, is the restrictions that are currently there around partitions, which means you've got to have them all online for certain activities. We can try and remove those, so when you say frozen, they can actually be frozen.